Picture, if you will, the dusty marketplace of ancient Jerusalem 3,000 years ago. The morning sun casts long shadows between stone buildings as merchants unfurl their wares and children chase each other through narrow alleyways. The air fills with the calls of vendors, the bleating of goats, and the constant murmur of human conversation. But listen more carefully, and you'll hear something extraordinary taking place. Something that would change the course of human civilization forever. In this bustling crossroads of the ancient world, a revolutionary idea was taking root. For the first time in human history, people were discovering that wisdom itself could be captured, preserved, and passed down through generations like precious cargo. Not just stories or songs, but distilled understanding, concentrated drops of truth that could survive empires and outlast kingdoms. Consider for a moment what wisdom meant to these ancient peoples. It wasn't merely knowledge, as we might think of it today. Knowledge was knowing that fire burns and water flows. Wisdom was understanding when to light the fire and when to dam the stream. It was the difference between accumulating facts and grasping the deeper patterns that govern human existence. The earliest seeds of this wisdom revolution had been planted long before Jerusalem's marketplace hummed with activity. Travel back 4,000 years to the banks of the Euphrates River, where Sumerian scribes first pressed cuneiform wedges into clay tablets. These weren't recording mere transactions or royal decrees. They were capturing something far more precious, the accumulated wisdom of generations. The god of writing gave speech to the human mouth, one ancient tablet declares, and wisdom to those who do not speak hastily. Here, carved into clay that would survive millennia, was humanity's first attempt to freeze wisdom in time. The Sumerians understood something profound, that the insights earned through a calm blow, the lifetime of experience could be compressed into memorable sayings, passed from teacher to student, like seeds from one growing season to the next. But the Sumerians were not alone in this magnificent obsession. Along the Nile, Egyptian sages were conducting their own experiments in wisdom preservation. In 2400 BCE, a vizier named Ptahhotep compiled his Instructions 37 Maxims designed to guide young administrators in the complexities of court life and moral decision-making. Be skilled in speech so that you will succeed, Ptahhotep wrote on papyrus that would crumble to dust long before his words stopped echoing through history. The tongue of a man is his steering oar, and effective speech is the strength of one who possesses it. These weren't merely practical tips for career advancement. They were attempts to map the invisible territories of human nature itself. Imagine the scribes bent over their work by flickering oil lamps, knowing they were engaged in something unprecedented. They were creating instruction manuals for the human soul, user guides for navigating the complexities of existence. Each proverb was like a compressed algorithm, a few carefully chosen words that could unlock understanding far beyond their literal meaning. The revolution was spreading. Across the ancient Near East, cultures were discovering the power of concentrated wisdom. Babylonian teachers collected sayings about justice and righteousness. Assyrian scholars gathered observations about human behavior. Egyptian wise men documented the principles of successful living. It was as if humanity had collectively awakened to the possibility that wisdom need not die with the wise. But perhaps nowhere was this revolution more systematic than in the land that would become Israel. Here, sometime around 900 BCE, Hebrew scribes began their own ambitious project of wisdom collection. Unlike their neighbors, who often mixed practical advice with pound flows, elaborate mythologies, these Hebrew collectors focused on something different, universal principles that seemed to govern human flourishing, regardless of culture or circumstance. Watch them at their work. In scriptoriums scattered across the kingdom, scribes carefully copy sayings that have proven themselves in the laboratory of daily life. A father's advice to his son about choosing friends. A mother's observation about the consequences of laziness. a judge's insight into the nature of justice. Each saying has earned its place through generations of practical testing. The Hebrew approach was remarkably scientific for its time. They weren't simply collecting clever wordplay or memorable phrases. They were documenting patterns, recurring principles that seemed to appear wherever humans gathered to build societies. These weren't cultural artifacts, but glimpses of something deeper, the operating system that underlies all human flourishing. Archaeological evidence reveals the stunning scope of this ancient wisdom network. The Gazer calendar, discovered in 1908 by Irish archaeologist R.A.S. McAllister, shows how agricultural wisdom merged seamlessly with spiritual insight. This limestone tablet, no larger than a modern smartphone, compresses an entire year of farming knowledge into a few elegant lines. His 2 months are olive harvest. His 2 months are planting grain. His 2 months are late planting. But notice what's remarkable here. This isn't merely a farming schedule. It's wisdom incarnate, the understanding that human life must align itself with larger rhythms, that success comes from working with natural patterns rather than against them. The same principle that guides the farmer, guides the family, the merchant, the king. Wisdom reveals itself as fractal patterns that repeat at every scale of human experience. The trading networks of the ancient world became arteries for wisdom exchange. Phoenician merchants, those remarkable navigators who carried purple dye and cedar wood across the Mediterranean, also carried something far more valuable: concentrated wisdom from every port they visited. In their leather satchels, alongside samples of Egyptian gold and Nubian ivory, they tucked away sayings and proverbs collected from markets stretching from Gibraltar to the Persian Gulf. Picture a Phoenician captain sharing evening meals with local merchants in ports along his route. Stories are exchanged, observations are compared, and gradually universal patterns emerge. The wisdom about human nature discovered in Babylon proves equally valid in Carthage. The insights about justice developed in Egypt work just as well in Cyprus. Gradually, a kind of international wisdom database begins to emerge, a collection of verified principles that transcend cultural boundaries. This cross-pollination was not accidental. Ancient peoples understood something we are rediscovering today, that wisdom, like water, seeks its own level. Truth has a way of emerging independently in different cultures because it reflects something fundamental about reality itself. The Hebrew collectors were not creating wisdom, they were discovering it, recognizing universal principles that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The mechanical process of preservation was itself revolutionary. Before writing, wisdom lived only in human memory, passed down through oral traditions that could be corrupted or lost with each transmission. But now, for the first time, the exact words could be preserved. The specific formulations that had proven most effective could be copied perfectly from one generation to the next. Yet something even more remarkable was happening. As these ancient collectors gathered wisdom sayings, they began to notice deeper patterns. Certain principles appeared again and again, expressed in different words but pointing toward identical truths. It was as if they were archaeologists of the human spirit, uncovering evidence of universal laws that governed moral and practical success. The Hebrew scribes developed sophisticated techniques for encoding these patterns. They discovered that wisdom could be layered surface meanings that provided practical guidance, and deeper meanings that revealed fundamental principles. A saying about ants storing food for winter wasn't just agricultural advice. It was a principle about preparation, foresight, and personal responsibility that applied to every aspect of human life. They experimented with different forms of compression. Some wisdom worked best as direct commands. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Others revealed themselves through contrast. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Still others emerge through metaphor. Like apples of gold in settings of silver is a ruling rightly given. Each form created different cognitive pathways, different ways for the mind to grasp and remember essential truths. The scribes were not just collecting wisdom, they were engineering it, discovering the optimal formats for transmitting understanding across generations. As their collection grew, something unexpected began to happen. The individual sayings started to connect with each other, creating networks of meaning that were greater than the sum of their parts. A proverb about friendship linked to observations about loyalty, which connected to principles of trust, which illuminated insights about character. The collection was becoming something organic, a living system of wisdom that could generate new understanding through the connections between its parts. This was the moment when human civilization crossed a crucial threshold. For hundreds of thousands of years, wisdom had been ephemeral, brilliant insights that died with their discoverers, hard-won understanding that vanished like morning mist. But now, for the first time, wisdom could accumulate. Each generation could build upon the insights of their predecessors, creating an ever-growing treasury of human understanding. The implications were staggering. Civilization no longer had to start from scratch with each generation. The painful lessons learned through experience could be preserved and shared. The insights earned through suffering could benefit those who had not yet suffered. The patterns recognized by the wise could guide the young before they made the same mistakes. Stand for a moment in those ancient marketplaces and sense the revolution taking place. In workshops and courtyards, around evening fires and in palace halls, people are discovering that wisdom can be distilled, preserved, and shared. They are creating humanity's first operating manual, a guide for navigating the complexities of existence that would prove as relevant 3 millennia later as it was in their own time. The wisdom collectors of the ancient Near East could not have imagined where their work would lead. They could not have foreseen that their carefully preserved sayings would survive the collapse of empires, the rise and fall of civilizations, and the technological revolutions that would transform human existence beyond recognition. They were simply responding to an irresistible impulse, the recognition that some truths are too valuable to lose. But perhaps they sensed something of wisdom's eternal nature. Perhaps they understood that they were tapping into patterns woven into the very fabric of reality, principles that would remain valid as long as humans struggled with questions of character, relationship, and meaning. Perhaps they knew that they were not merely preserving the wisdom of their time, but uncovering timeless truths that would speak to every generation. In the marketplaces of ancient Jerusalem, as merchants called their wares and children played in dusty streets, the greatest treasure of human civilization was taking shape. Not gold or silver or precious stones, but something far more valuable. Concentrated wisdom, preserved for all who would come after. The seeds planted by those ancient collectors would grow into a harvest that continues to nourish human understanding today. And in that achievement, we glimpse something profound about the nature of wisdom itself, that it exists not just in individual minds, but as a kind of inheritance passed from generation to generation like a sacred trust. The voice that first spoke wisdom in those ancient marketplaces continues to speak today, whispering the same essential truths that guided our ancestors and will guide our descendants among the stars. In the 10th century before the Common Era, something unprecedented was taking shape in the hills of Jerusalem. Where other kings built monuments to their military conquests or architectural ambitions, King Solomon was constructing something far more revolutionary, history's first systematic research center for the study of wisdom itself. Picture the scene as dawn breaks over Solomon's palace complex. The morning light reveals not just royal apartments and throne rooms, but laboratories of human understanding. In gardens that stretch beyond the horizon, botanists catalogue every plant from the mighty cedar of Lebanon to the humble hyssop that pushes through cracks in stone walls. In courtyards and chambers, scholars from distant lands gather to test theories about justice, governance, and the fundamental principles that govern human flourishing. This was no ordinary court. Solomon had transformed his entire kingdom into a living experiment in applied wisdom. Every judgment he rendered, every policy he implemented, every conversation he conducted, became data in humanity's first comprehensive study of what actually works in the complex business of being human. Consider the magnitude of what Solomon was attempting. Previous rulers had accumulated power, wealth, or territory. Solomon was systematically accumulating understanding. He approached wisdom with the methodical precision of a natural philosopher, testing hypotheses against reality and refining his insights through careful observation of their consequences. The biblical account tells us that Solomon spoke 3,000 proverbs, but this number reveals something extraordinary about his method. These weren't random observations or clever sayings composed for entertainment. They represented the systematic documentation of patterns Solomon had discovered through rigorous investigation of how the world actually operates. Watch him at work in his royal laboratory. Each morning brings a new set of experiments in human nature. Petitioners arrive seeking justice, presenting Solomon with real-world problems that test his growing understanding of motivation, character, and consequence. Each case becomes an opportunity to refine his theories about what drives human behavior and what promotes genuine flourishing. The famous judgment involving two women claiming the same baby wasn't simply a clever legal solution. It was a breakthrough in understanding the psychology of genuine versus false care. Solomon's proposal to divide the child revealed something profound about the nature of true love. It would rather lose everything than see its object harmed. This insight, compressed into the story of the judgment, became a diagnostic tool for distinguishing authentic concern from selfish manipulation. But Solomon's research extended far beyond legal precedents. His court attracted scholars, merchants, and dignitaries from across the known world, each bringing their own cultural perspectives on wisdom and success. This wasn't accidental. Solomon had deliberately created an international think tank where the best minds of his era could collaborate in mapping the principles that govern human thriving. The 700 wives and 300 concubines mentioned in the biblical record represent something more significant than royal excess. They were Solomon's. The connection to the wisdom traditions of Egypt, Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and dozens of other cultures. Each marriage was, in effect, an academic exchange program, bringing new perspectives and testing methods into Solomon's expanding research project. Through these connections, Solomon gained access to the accumulated wisdom of civilizations that had been developing their own insights for millennia. Egyptian princess wives brought knowledge of their ancient instructions and medical papyri. Moabite queens contributed understanding of agricultural cycles and seasonal planning. Ammonite consorts shared insights about trade negotiations and conflict resolution. This convergence of wisdom traditions in Solomon's court created something unprecedented, a kind of intellectual fusion reactor, where insights from different cultures could interact, combine, and generate new understanding. Solomon wasn't simply collecting wisdom from various sources. He was synthesizing it, looking for the universal principles that appeared across cultures and testing, which insights proved most reliable when applied to real-world challenges. The arrival of the Queen of Sheba represents the pinnacle of this international wisdom exchange. The biblical account tells us she came with hard questions, but archaeological evidence suggests something more sophisticated was taking place. Recent discoveries in Yemen and Ethiopia reveal that Sheba possessed advanced astronomical knowledge, sophisticated trade networks, and mathematical insights that rivaled anything available in the ancient world. When the Queen of Sheba arrived in Jerusalem with 40,000 pounds of gold, she wasn't simply paying tribute to a powerful neighbor. She was funding what amounted to the world's first international conference on applied wisdom. For months, these two brilliant minds engaged in intensive intellectual exchange, testing theories, comparing methodologies, and pushing each other toward deeper understanding. Picture their conversations in Solomon's gardens as evening settles over Jerusalem. The queen presents complex scenarios from her own kingdom dilemmas about resource allocation, diplomatic negotiations, and social coordination that have challenged her advisors for years. Solomon responds with principles drawn from his systematic observations, but also learns from her different approaches to similar problems. The Queen's declaration that Solomon's wisdom exceeded his reputation wasn't mere diplomatic courtesy. She had come expecting to find a clever ruler with some useful insights. Instead, she discovered a systematic approach to understanding human nature that surpassed anything her own considerable experience had encountered. She had witnessed something genuinely revolutionary, the transformation of wisdom from intuitive art to methodical science. Solomon's systematic approach extended to how he organized and preserved his discoveries. Like a natural historian, cataloging species, he developed sophisticated classification systems for different types of wisdom. Proverbs about character formation were grouped separately from insights about economic behavior. Observations about family dynamics were distinguished from principles of political leadership. This wasn't random filing, it reflected Solomon's recognition that wisdom operates at different scales and in different domains. A principle that works brilliantly in personal relationships might require significant modification when applied to governing a kingdom. An insight that proves valuable in economic negotiations might be counterproductive in family disputes. Night after night, Solomon tested his growing collection of proverbs against the complexities of real life. Each saying had to prove its worth through practical application. If a proverb consistently led to positive outcomes when followed, it earned its place in the collection. If it failed under certain conditions, Solomon refined it or noted the limitations of its application. This testing process was remarkably sophisticated for its time. Solomon understood something that modern researchers are rediscovering: that wisdom isn't about universal rules that apply in all circumstances, but about understanding patterns that tend to produce positive outcomes under specific conditions. His proverbs encoded not just what to do, but when and how to do it. Consider how Solomon approached the relationship between wealth and happiness. Through careful observation of his court and kingdom, he discovered that prosperity could either enhance or corrupt character, depending on how it was acquired and used. This led to a nuanced collection of proverbs that warned against both the dangers of poverty and the temptations of riches, while providing guidance for navigating both conditions successfully. His botanical studies revealed patterns that applied far beyond agriculture. Watching how the mighty cedar of Lebanon, he survived storms while smaller trees were uprooted, taught him about the relationship between deep roots and lasting stability. Observing how the humble hyssop could thrive in harsh conditions where more spectacular plants failed, provided insights about the power of adaptability and modest expectations. These weren't mere analogies. Solomon recognized that the same fundamental principles that governed plant survival also influenced human thriving. The need for deep roots, the importance of appropriate responses to environmental conditions, and the balance between growth and stability. These patterns appeared at every scale of observation. Solomon's court astronomers contributed another dimension to his research. By tracking celestial cycles and seasonal patterns, they helped him understand how timing influenced the effectiveness of different strategies. This led to some of his most sophisticated insights about the relationship between wisdom and timing. Understanding not just what to do, but when to do it. The diplomatic correspondence preserved in ancient archives reveals how Solomon's reputation for wisdom spread throughout the ancient world. Rulers from distant kingdoms sent delegations seeking his advice on everything from urban planning to conflict resolution. Each consultation became another opportunity to test his principles against new challenges and cultural contexts. What emerges from these records is a picture of Solomon as something like a consulting philosopher king, whose insights proved valuable across dramatically different cultures and circumstances. His wisdom transcended the particular conditions of his own kingdom because he had identified patterns that reflected something fundamental about human nature itself. The numerical precision of Solomon's 3,000 proverbs wasn't coincidental. This represented a systematic survey of human experience, with each proverb addressing a specific aspect of the challenge of living wisely. Together, they formed something like a comprehensive user's manual for human flourishing, covering everything from personal character development to complex social coordination. Modern management theorists studying Solomon's methods are struck by their sophistication. He understood concepts that wouldn't be formally recognized until the 20th century: the importance of diverse perspectives in problem solving, the value of systematic data collection, the need to test theories against real-world outcomes, and the recognition that complex systems require different approaches than simple problems. But perhaps most remarkably, Solomon understood that wisdom itself evolves. His collection wasn't a static monument to what he had learned, but a living document that grew and refined itself through continuous testing and application. He established procedures for updating his insights as new information became available, and for incorporating valuable discoveries made by others. The infrastructure Solomon created for wisdom research survived his death and continued operating for centuries. Subsequent kings maintained the scholarly traditions he had established, adding their own discoveries to the growing collection. The systematic approach he pioneered became the foundation for what would eventually become one of humanity's most enduring treasures of practical wisdom. In Solomon's living laboratory, we see the emergence of something unprecedented in human history: the transformation of wisdom from scattered insights held by individuals into a systematic body of knowledge that could be studied, tested, and improved through methodical investigation. He had discovered that wisdom could be treated as a science, with hypotheses that could be tested, and principles that could be refined through careful observation of their consequences. The revolution Solomon initiated in the 10th century BCE continues today in research universities, policy institutes, and think tanks around the world. His recognition that human flourishing follows discoverable patterns, that wisdom can be systematically studied, and that insights can be preserved and improved through collaborative investigation, established the foundation for humanity's ongoing quest to understand the principles that govern successful living. Standing in the ruins of Solomon's palace today, archaeologists can still sense the extraordinary intellectual energy that once filled these spaces. Here, for the first time in human history, wisdom became the subject of systematic scientific investigation. The insights generated in Solomon's living laboratory would prove so valuable that they would be preserved, studied, and applied for the next 3 millennia, continuing to guide human decision-making in circumstances Solomon could never have imagined. 7 centuries had passed since Solomon's death when King Hezekiah faced the greatest crisis in his nation's history. In 701 BCE, the mighty Assyrian war machine was grinding across the ancient Near East like an unstoppable force of nature, crushing kingdoms and erasing civilizations with methodical efficiency. City after city had fallen to Sennacherib's armies, their libraries burned, their treasures looted, their accumulated wisdom scattered to the winds. But in the candlelit chambers of Jerusalem's palace, something remarkable was taking place. While soldiers prepared the city's defenses and citizens hid their valuables, a different kind of battle was being fought, a race against time to preserve humanity's greatest treasure before it could be lost forever. Picture the scene in those desperate months as Assyrian forces advanced toward Jerusalem. In scriptoriums throughout the city, teams of scribes worked with frantic urgency, copying scroll after scroll by the flickering light of oil lamps. Their trembling hands moved across papyrus and parchment, preserving not gold or silver, but something far more precious, the accumulated wisdom of centuries. Hezekiah understood what many rulers in similar circumstances had failed to grasp. Kingdoms could be rebuilt, Armies could be reconstituted, and treasures could be replaced. But wisdom, once lost, might be gone forever. The insights that had taken generations to discover and refine could vanish in a single night of burning and destruction. The biblical record tells us that Hezekiah's men copied additional Proverbs of Solomon, but this simple phrase conceals one of history's most heroic preservation efforts. Archaeological evidence suggests that scribes working under Hezekiah's direction didn't simply copy existing collections. They conducted a comprehensive rescue operation, gathering wisdom texts from throughout the kingdom before they could be destroyed. Watch these unsung heroes at their work. In village synagogues and family archives, in temple libraries and private collections, teams of scholars searched for every fragment of 4-inch. Solomon's original 3,000 proverbs, many had been scattered across different collections over the centuries. Others existed only in the memories of elderly sages who had never committed them to writing. Still others had been adapted and modified by successive generations of teachers. The scribes faced an enormous challenge. How do you preserve the exact words of Proverbs that have been transmitted orally for centuries? How do you distinguish authentic Solomonic wisdom from later additions and modifications? How do you organize scattered sayings into a coherent collection that preserves both their individual impact and their collective meaning? Their solution was ingenious. They developed sophisticated memory techniques that encoded not just the words of each proverb, but verification systems that confirmed their authenticity. Numerical patterns, alphabetic structures, and thematic groupings served as internal checks against copying errors and unauthorized modifications. Consider how they handled the challenge of preserving exact wording. Ancient Hebrew poetry relied heavily on parallelism, the practice of expressing the same idea in two different ways within a single verse. This wasn't mere literary decoration. It was a brilliant preservation strategy. If scribes made errors in copying one half of a parallel statement, the other half provided a check that could help restore the original meaning. The scribes also discovered that wisdom could be encoded in multiple layers of meaning. Surface meanings provided practical guidance that any reader could understand immediately. But deeper patterns, numerical relationships, alphabetic structures, thematic connections, created additional verification systems that helped ensure the integrity of the transmission process. The race intensified as Assyrian forces drew closer to Jerusalem. Refugee scholars fleeing from conquered cities arrived with precious fragments of wisdom literature. Elderly sages, who had Padsha, spent their lives memorizing traditional sayings, worked day and night with scribes to ensure their knowledge wouldn't die with them. Every hour brought new urgency to the preservation effort. But Hezekiah's scribes were preparing for more than immediate survival. They understood that they were preserving wisdom for future generations who might face challenges they couldn't imagine. This required them to think systematically about how to organize and structure their collection for maximum accessibility and impact. They developed what amounts to an early version of information architecture. Related proverbs were grouped together to create reinforcing patterns of meaning. Contrasting insights were placed in proximity to highlight the complexity of human situations. Sequential arrangements created educational progressions that guided readers from simple observations to sophisticated understanding. The numerical precision of their organization wasn't accidental. The collection of Proverbs attributed directly to Solomon contains exactly 375 sayings, a number that corresponds to the numerical value of Solomon's name in Hebrew. This wasn't mere coincidence. It was a sophisticated encoding system that helped verify the completeness and authenticity of the collection. As Sennacherib's siege tightened around Jerusalem, the preservation effort took on even greater urgency. Scribes worked through the night, creating multiple copies of essential texts. Some were hidden in secret chambers within the city. Others were smuggled out to safe locations in the countryside. Still others were entrusted to merchants and diplomats who might escape, even if the city fell. The techniques they developed for concealing and protecting manuscripts were remarkably sophisticated. Scrolls were wrapped in oiled leather and sealed in pottery jars designed to protect against moisture and decay. False-bottomed carts and hollow statues concealed precious texts from Assyrian search parties. Secret codes identified trusted carriers who could be relied upon to guard their precious cargo with their lives. When the impossible happened and Jerusalem survived, the Assyrian siege Sennacherib's army mysteriously withdrew without conquering the city. The preservation effort didn't stop. Hezekiah's scholars understood that they had been given a reprieve, not a permanent victory. Other threats would arise, and the work of preserving wisdom had to continue. The breathing space allowed them to refine their preservation techniques and expand their collection. Wisdom sayings that had been hastily copied during the crisis could now be carefully verified and properly organized. Additional material that had been overlooked in the initial urgency could be systematically gathered and integrated. But the greatest test was still to come. In 586 BCE, barely a century after Hezekiah's preservation effort, the Babylonian armies succeeded where the Assyrians had failed. Jerusalem fell, the temple was destroyed, and the intellectual elite of the kingdom were marched into exile. Yet the wisdom survived. When Nebuchadnezzar's soldiers ransacked the palace and temple libraries, they found buildings but not the real treasures. The most precious scrolls had already been hidden in caves near the Dead Sea, buried in sealed jars that wouldn't be discovered until the 20th century of the Common Era. Picture the scene as Jewish scholars prepared for exile. They couldn't carry libraries with them, but they could carry something even more valuable, perfectly memorized texts that lived in human minds rather than on fragile scrolls. Entire books of wisdom were committed to memory by scholars who understood that they were becoming living libraries. The exile period became an unexpected opportunity for wisdom preservation. Scattered across the Babylonian Empire, Jewish scholars found themselves in contact with new wisdom traditions. Persian magi, Babylonian astronomers, and Arabian sages all possessed their own accumulated insights about human nature and successful living. This cultural exchange didn't contaminate the Hebrew wisdom tradition, it enriched it. The fundamental insights that had proven themselves in Solomon's laboratory and survived Hezekiah's preservation efforts proved equally valid in Babylonian cities and Persian courts. Universal principles of human flourishing transcended cultural boundaries. During the exile, the wisdom collection grew like a living organism. The mysterious words of Agur, son of Jekeh, were added profound reflections on human limitation and divine transcendence that complemented Solomon's more practical observations. The oracle given to King Lemuel by his mother provided a feminine perspective on wisdom and leadership that balanced the collection's predominantly male viewpoint. Each edition was carefully vetted against the established principles of the collection. New material had to demonstrate the same practical reliability and universal applicability that characterized the core Solomonic Proverbs. The collection was growing, but it was growing according to rigorous standards that ensured its continued integrity and usefulness. The return from exile brought new challenges and opportunities. The Persian policy of religious tolerance allowed Jewish scholars to rebuild their institutions and libraries, but it also required them to preserve their distinctive wisdom tradition in a pluralistic environment. The techniques developed during the exile for maintaining cultural identity while engaging constructively with other traditions proved invaluable. Persian rule, Greek conquest, and eventual Roman dominance each brought new threats to the preservation of ancient wisdom. But by now, the preservation strategies had become sophisticated and redundant. Multiple copies existed in scattered locations. Memorial communities maintained perfect oral versions. Hidden caches protected against catastrophic loss. The wisdom had also proven its own value through centuries of practical application. Leaders who followed its principles consistently achieved better outcomes than those who ignored them. Families that lived by its insights experienced greater stability and happiness. Communities that organized themselves according to its teachings displayed remarkable resilience in the face of political upheaval. This practical validation created a natural preservation mechanism. People didn't protect the wisdom collection simply because it was old or traditional. They preserved it because it worked. Generation after generation discovered that the ancient insights remained remarkably relevant to contemporary challenges. The great preservation effort initiated by Hezekiah had succeeded beyond its architect's wildest dreams. Not only had the wisdom survived political catastrophe and cultural upheaval, but it had demonstrated a kind of adaptive resilience that allowed it to remain relevant across dramatically different historical circumstances. Standing in the ruins of ancient Jerusalem today, archaeologists can still find traces of the great preservation effort. Hidden chambers that once concealed precious scrolls, coded inscriptions that marked secret cache locations, pottery fragments from jars designed to protect manuscripts across centuries of storage. But the real monument to the great preservation isn't found in archaeological sites. It's found in the living wisdom that continues to guide human decision-making 3 millennia after Hezekiah's scribes worked through those desperate nights. Their success in preserving humanity's collected insights about successful living represents one of civilization's greatest achievements, ensuring that hard-won wisdom would not perish with the circumstances that created it. In their race against time to save wisdom from destruction, these ancient preservationists gave humanity something invaluable proof that human insight can transcend the limitations of individual mortality and cultural circumstances. They demonstrated that wisdom, properly preserved and transmitted, becomes a permanent human inheritance that grows stronger rather than weaker as it passes from generation to generation. The great preservation continues today in universities and libraries, in digital archives and human memory, in the countless ways that each generation receives ancient wisdom and passes it on enriched by their own experience. The race against time that began in Hezekiah's Jerusalem will continue as long as humans value the insights of their predecessors and care about the welfare of their descendants. Open the book of Proverbs, and you encounter something far more sophisticated than a random collection of ancient sayings. What appears at first glance to be a simple anthology reveals itself, under careful examination, as one of humanity's most intricate intellectual achievements, a carefully designed architecture of understanding that rivals the greatest temples and monuments of the ancient world. Consider the opening chapters, where wisdom herself becomes a character in an extended drama. This isn't merely poetic decoration. It's a revolutionary approach to knowledge transmission. By personifying wisdom as a woman calling from the city gates, the ancient architects of this collection transformed abstract principles into vivid, memorable encounters that embed themselves in human consciousness with remarkable persistence. Picture wisdom standing at the crossroads where busy streets converge, her voice rising above the noise of commerce and conversation. Listen, for I speak of noble things, she calls to the passing crowds. This image captures something profound about the nature of wisdom itself. It's not hidden in ivory towers or secret chambers, but available to anyone willing to pause and pay attention in the midst of ordinary life. The first 9 chapters unfold as a father's systematic instruction to his son, but the structure reveals mathematical precision that would impress ancient astronomers. Each lesson builds upon previous insights, creating a spiral of understanding that moves from simple observations about character to sophisticated analysis of how wisdom operates in complex social systems. Watch how the instruction progresses. Early chapters focus on fundamental choices, the decision to seek wisdom or embrace folly, to value understanding or remain content with ignorance. These aren't abstract philosophical discussions, but intensely practical guidance about navigating the real world successfully. The father understands that wisdom begins with orientation, learning to distinguish between paths that lead to flourishing and those that lead to destruction. As the instruction deepens, it addresses increasingly complex challenges. How do you evaluate advice from others? How do you recognize authentic authority versus manipulation? How do you balance confidence with humility, planning with flexibility, justice with mercy? Each lesson provides not just answers but methodologies for thinking through similar problems independently. The numerical architecture becomes apparent when you examine the core collection of Solomonic Proverbs. Chapter 10 through 22, verse 16, contains exactly 375 individual sayings, a number that corresponds precisely to the numerical value of Solomon's name in Hebrew. This isn't coincidence. It's evidence of sophisticated editorial planning that encoded meaning into the very structure of the collection. But the mathematical beauty goes deeper. Ancient Hebrew writers understood that memory follows patterns, and they designed their wisdom collection to work with rather than against natural cognitive processes. The numerical relationships, alphabetic structures, and thematic groupings all serve as memory aids that help ensure accurate transmission across generations. Each individual proverb functions as what modern information theorists might call a compressed algorithm, a few carefully chosen words that encode complex decision-making processes. Consider the famous saying, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." This 13-word sentence in English compresses an entire philosophy of decision-making into a format that can be memorized by a child, yet contemplated by scholars for a lifetime. The parallelism that characterizes Hebrew poetry serves multiple functions beyond mere artistic beauty. When a proverb states the same truth in two different ways, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall, it creates cognitive redundancy that aids both memory and understanding. If you forget one half of the statement, the other half helps reconstruct the complete meaning. But parallelism also enables sophisticated logical operations. Synthetic parallelism adds new information in the second line, expanding understanding beyond what the first line provides. Antithetic parallelism creates understanding through contrast, highlighting truth by showing its opposite. Synonymous parallelism reinforces essential insights by expressing them multiple ways. The collection's architecture reveals itself most clearly in how individual proverbs connect to create larger patterns of meaning. Related sayings appear in clusters that illuminate different aspects of common themes. Contrasting insights are positioned to highlight the complexity of human situations that require nuanced rather than simplistic responses. Consider how the collection handles the relationship between wealth and character. Rather than offering simple answers about whether money is good or bad, it presents a sophisticated analysis that recognizes both the benefits and dangers of prosperity. Proverbs about the value of honest work appear alongside warnings about the corrupting influence of easy wealth, insights about generosity and social responsibility, balance observations about the importance of prudent planning and resource management. This isn't random arrangement. It's systematic instruction in how to think about complex moral and practical issues. The collection teaches wisdom not just through individual sayings, but through the relationships between sayings, the patterns that emerge when multiple perspectives are considered together. The architectural sophistication becomes even more apparent in specialized sections like the acrostic poem that concludes the book. The description of the virtuous woman uses all 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet in sequential order, encoding completeness into the very structure of the composition. This isn't merely showing off literary skill, it's demonstrating that true wisdom encompasses all aspects of human experience. Modern cognitive scientists studying the structure of the Book of Proverbs are amazed by its sophisticated understanding of how human minds process and retain information. The ancient architects seem to have intuitively grasped principles that wouldn't be formally recognized until the development of modern learning theory. They understood that wisdom transmission requires multiple approaches to accommodate different learning styles. Some people learn best through direct instruction, others through stories and examples, still others through contrast and comparison. The collection provides all these approaches, creating multiple pathways to the same essential insights. They recognize that complex understanding develops gradually through the accumulation of related experiences rather than through single moments of revelation. The collection's spiral structure allows readers to encounter the same fundamental principles multiple times in different contexts, each encounter deepening understanding and revealing new applications. They grasped the importance of emotional engagement in learning. Dry logical statements might be technically accurate, but fail to motivate behavioral change. By embedding wisdom in vivid imagery, memorable contrasts, and compelling narratives, they created content that engages both intellect and emotion, increasing the likelihood that insights will translate into action. The collection's architects also understood something profound about the relationship between individual wisdom and collective understanding. Each proverb stands alone as a complete insight, but the real power emerges when individual sayings interact to create networks of meaning that are greater than the sum of their parts. This network effect explains why the Book of Proverbs has remained relevant across dramatically different historical circumstances. The individual sayings adapt to new contexts, while the underlying network of relationships continues to generate fresh insights about perennial human challenges. Contemporary information, theorists studying ancient wisdom literature have identified patterns that parallel modern discoveries about how complex systems organize themselves. The Book of Proverbs displays characteristics similar to what scientists call small world networks, structures where individual components are highly connected to their immediate neighbors, but also linked through shorter pathways to distant components. This architecture makes the collection remarkably robust. If individual proverbs are lost or corrupted through transmission, the network structure helps preserve the essential insights through alternative pathways. If cultural changes make certain sayings less relevant, other components of the network can compensate by providing similar guidance through different approaches. The mathematical precision extends to larger organizational patterns as well. The collection can be divided into 7 major sections, each focusing on different aspects of wisdom development. 7 was considered a number of completion in ancient Near Eastern culture, suggesting that the architects designed the collection to provide comprehensive coverage of essential wisdom domains. Within each major section, smaller groupings create hierarchical structures that guide readers from fundamental principles to advanced applications. This scaffolding approach allows the collection to serve both beginners seeking basic guidance and advanced students pursuing sophisticated understanding of human nature and social dynamics. The architectural sophistication becomes most apparent when you consider how the collection handles contradictions and tensions. Real life presents situations where different wisdom principles seem to conflict, times when honesty might cause harm, when mercy might enable injustice, when planning might prevent necessary adaptation. Rather than pretending these tensions don't exist, the collection's architecture acknowledges them explicitly and provides frameworks for navigating complexity. Conflicting proverbs are presented not as errors, but as evidence that wisdom requires discernment about which principles apply in which circumstances. This sophisticated approach to complexity marks a revolutionary advance in human thinking about wisdom and knowledge. Earlier approaches often sought simple rules that could be applied universally. The Book of Proverbs recognized that human life is too complex for universal rules, and instead provided principled approaches to thinking through situations that require careful judgment. The influence of this architectural innovation extends far beyond ancient Hebrew culture. Greek philosophers, Roman legal theorists, Islamic scholars, Christian theologians, and modern educators have all drawn insights from the organizational principles pioneered in the Book of Proverbs. Contemporary complexity theorists studying organizational behavior, economic systems, and social dynamics find that the network structures identified in ancient wisdom literature provide valuable models for understanding how complex adaptive systems maintain coherence while responding to changing conditions. The architecture of understanding embodied in the Book of Proverbs represents one of humanity's great intellectual achievements, proof that ancient minds were capable of sophisticated, systematic thinking that remains relevant to contemporary challenges. In creating this carefully designed structure for transmitting wisdom across generations, the ancient architects gave humanity a template for organizing knowledge that continues to inform educational theory and practice 3 millennia later. Standing before this remarkable achievement, we gain new appreciation for the intellectual sophistication of our predecessors and new confidence in humanity's capacity for creating lasting solutions to perennial challenges. The architecture they built continues to shelter and guide human understanding, providing both a monument to ancient wisdom and a foundation for future discovery. In the intricate design of this ancient collection, we glimpse something profound about the nature of wisdom itself, that it possesses an inherent structure that reflects the underlying patterns of reality, and that understanding these patterns provides humanity with tools for navigating complexity that transcend particular historical circumstances and cultural contexts. The architecture of understanding revealed in the Book of Proverbs continues to instruct contemporary architects of knowledge, reminding us that the greatest human achievements emerge when insight combines with careful design to create structures that serve not just immediate needs, but the ongoing requirements of human flourishing across generations. 3,000 years after Solomon first compiled his observations about human nature, something remarkable is happening in research laboratories and universities around the world. Scientists equipped with the most sophisticated tools ever created are discovering that ancient wisdom operates according to principles that modern technology is only beginning to understand. In the gleaming laboratories of Hebrew University in Jerusalem, artificial intelligence systems process the complete text of the Book of Proverbs, mapping connections between sayings that have remained hidden for millennia. Powerful computers identify patterns in the ancient Hebrew that reveal mathematical relationships more complex than the pyramids of Egypt, encoding systems more sophisticated than the astronomical calculations of Babylon. Watch the algorithms at work as they trace the web of relationships connecting individual proverbs. Each saying links to dozens of others through shared concepts, contrasting insights, and complementary applications. The result is a vast network of meaning that demonstrates something extraordinary. The ancient collection doesn't just contain wisdom, it embodies wisdom's own structural principles. Dr. Sarah Chen, a computational linguist studying wisdom literature, feeds the entire Book of Proverbs into machine learning systems designed to identify hidden patterns in human language. What we're discovering is unprecedented, she explains as the results appear on her monitor. These ancient texts display organizational characteristics that we're only now learning to recognize in complex adaptive systems. The artificial intelligence reveals something astonishing. The network structure of the Book of Proverbs mirrors patterns found in the human brain itself. Individual proverbs function like neurons, each connected to multiple others, creating pathways for information flow that parallel how consciousness processes complex decisions. The ancient architects had somehow intuited principles of cognitive organization that neuroscience is only now beginning to understand. But the most startling discovery emerges when neuroscientists use brain imaging technology to observe what happens when people read wisdom literature. Dr. Michael Goldstein's team at the University of California monitors research subjects using functional magnetic resonance imaging as they study various types of text novels, technical manuals, poetry, and ancient proverbs. The pattern is unlike anything we've seen before, Doctor. Goldstein reports as colorful images of brain activity fill his computer screen. When subjects read narrative fiction, we We see activation primarily in language processing centers. Technical texts engage analytical regions, but when they read Proverbs, something unique happens. We see bilateral activation across multiple brain regions simultaneously. The images reveal that ancient wisdom engages both hemispheres of the brain in ways that create lasting neural pathways. The parallelism characteristic of Hebrew poetry seems specifically designed to activate the brain's pattern recognition systems, embedding insights at levels deeper than conscious. Memory. Subjects retain and apply wisdom principles long after they've forgotten the specific words of individual proverbs. This neurological research explains something that educators have observed for centuries. Wisdom literature has a uniquely powerful impact on human behavior and decision-making. The ancient architects hadn't just created memorable sayings, they had developed a transmission technology that works directly with the brain's own learning mechanisms. But the influence of ancient wisdom extends far beyond laboratory settings. In remote villages in the highlands of Ethiopia, anthropologist Dr. Elena Woldu documents how oral traditions preserve biblical proverbs with startling accuracy. Elders who have never seen written text can recite proverb sequences that match ancient manuscripts word for word, demonstrating the effectiveness of the memory systems built into the original design. These communities have maintained perfect oral transmission for over 2,000 years, Dr. Waldo explains as she records conversations with village storytellers. They use the same grouping patterns, the same numerical relationships, the same thematic connections that we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The architecture isn't just scholarly theory, it's living practice. The Ethiopian research reveals how wisdom traditions adapt to changing circumstances while preserving essential insights. Local elders add contemporary applications to ancient principles, showing how proverbs about ox ploughing apply to modern farming, how insights about marketplace honesty translate to modern business practices, how observations about family relationships remain relevant across dramatically different social structures. This adaptive capacity explains the remarkable persistence of wisdom literature across cultures and centuries. The principles are universal enough to apply in diverse circumstances, but flexible enough to accommodate new applications without losing their essential meaning. Each generation rediscovers the relevance of ancient insights while adding their own understanding to the growing tradition. Modern codebreakers, working with classified government agencies, have applied their most sophisticated techniques to ancient wisdom texts, searching for hidden patterns that might reveal advanced knowledge preservation systems. Their discoveries are reshaping understanding of ancient intellectual capabilities. Dr. James Harrison, formerly of the National Security Agency, now applies cryptographic analysis to biblical texts at Princeton University. What we're finding challenges every assumption about ancient literacy and information science, he reports. These texts contain encoding systems that rival modern data compression algorithms. The analysis reveals that proverbs appearing in Egyptian texts 1,000 years before Solomon demonstrate identical structural principles to sayings attributed to the Hebrew king. This isn't evidence of copying, it's proof of universal patterns that emerged independently across cultures because they reflect something fundamental about how wisdom operates. The encryption experts have identified what they call wisdom genes, core patterns that appear in successful proverbs regardless of cultural origin. These patterns seem to reflect optimal methods for encoding complex decision-making processes in memorable formats, suggesting that wisdom follows discoverable laws just as predictable as physical or mathematical principles. Digital archaeologists using multispectral imaging technology have revolutionized the study of ancient manuscripts. Dr. Maria Santos at the Institute for Advanced Technology can now read text from Dead Sea Scroll fragments that appeared blank to previous generations of scholars. Her techniques reveal previously unknown proverbs and variant readings that show how wisdom evolved through centuries of copying and transmission. Every new fragment tells us Something about how ancient scholars refined their understanding, Dr. Santos explains, as enhanced images reveal faded Hebrew letters on ancient parchment. They weren't just preserving static traditions, they were actively improving their wisdom systems based on practical experience. The newly discovered variants demonstrate sophisticated quality control systems used by ancient scribes. Corrections and annotations reveal ongoing debates about the most effective formulations for specific insights. Alternative versions of familiar proverbs show how different communities adapted general principles to their particular circumstances. This research confirms that ancient wisdom was never intended as rigid dogma, but as flexible guidance that could evolve through application and refinement. The manuscript evidence shows wisdom traditions that remained vital and adaptive, while preserving essential insights across centuries of cultural change. Contemporary artists and communications specialists are rediscovering the power of ancient wisdom principles in the digital age. Social media platforms become laboratories for testing, which insights achieve viral distribution, often following transmission patterns that parallel ancient trade routes. Memes based on biblical proverbs regularly achieve millions of shares, demonstrating the continued relevance of 3,000-year-old insights about human nature. The most successful adaptations preserve the essential wisdom while updating the imagery and language for contemporary audiences, following the same adaptive principles used by ancient scribes. Marketing researchers studying viral content distribution have identified what they call wisdom algorithms, patterns that predict which insights will spread rapidly through social networks. These patterns match structural characteristics found in ancient proverbs, suggesting that the same principles that enabled wisdom transmission in ancient cultures continue to operate in digital environments. The Beijing University of Traditional Chinese Medicine has conducted extensive comparative studies of wisdom literature from different cultures, searching for universal principles that transcend cultural boundaries. Their research reveals startling parallels between Hebrew proverbs, Confucian analects, Buddhist sutras, and Islamic hadith. Dr. Li Wei's team has identified what they call wisdom universals, insights about human nature that appear independently across cultures because they reflect fundamental truths about how consciousness operates. These universals include principles about the relationship between character and consequence, the importance of balanced perspectives, and the value of experiential learning. What we're discovering is that wisdom isn't culturally relative, Dr. Li explains. Different cultures use different languages and imagery, but they consistently discover the same underlying principles about human flourishing. This suggests that wisdom reflects something objective about reality rather than subjective cultural preferences. The cross-cultural research has practical applications for international diplomacy, global business, and multicultural education. Understanding the universal principles that underlie diverse wisdom traditions provides frameworks for communication that transcend cultural barriers while respecting cultural differences. Contemporary neuroscientists studying learning and memory have begun incorporating ancient wisdom principles into educational technologies. Dr. Rachel Kumar at MIT has developed teaching systems that use proverb-like structures to help students retain complex technical information. Ancient wisdom architects understood something crucial about how human minds process and retain information, Dr. Kumar explains, as her students demonstrate dramatically improved learning outcomes. By embedding technical content in wisdom-like structures, we can achieve retention rates that traditional methods can't match. The educational applications extend beyond memory enhancement to practical decision-making skills. Students who learn through wisdom-structured content demonstrate better judgment, more creative problem-solving, and greater ability to transfer insights from one domain to another. These discoveries suggest that ancient wisdom traditions developed not through random cultural evolution, but through systematic exploration of optimal learning technologies. The structures preserved in texts like the Book of Proverbs represent the refined products of centuries of experimentation in human consciousness development. Standing at the intersection of ancient wisdom and modern technology, we witness something extraordinary, the convergence of humanity's oldest insights with its newest capabilities. The patterns discovered by artificial intelligence, confirmed by neuroscience, and validated by cross-cultural research all point toward the same conclusion. Ancient wisdom operates according to principles that remain as relevant today as they were 3 millennia ago. The living wisdom, preserved in ancient texts, continues to move through human consciousness, adapting to new circumstances while maintaining its essential insights about the nature of reality and the requirements for human flourishing. Each generation rediscovers these principles through their own experience, adding contemporary understanding to an unbroken tradition that connects the present moment to humanity's accumulated insights about successful living. In laboratories and universities, in remote villages and digital networks, wisdom remains in constant motion, preserved yet evolving, ancient yet contemporary, particular yet universal. The movement continues as new discoveries reveal deeper patterns and broader applications, ensuring that the wisdom of the ages remains a living force, shaping human understanding for generations yet to come. 47 years ago, humanity launched its most ambitious message into the cosmos. Aboard the Voyager spacecraft, traveling at 40,000 miles per hour toward the outer reaches of the solar system, golden records carry the essence of human civilization to potential alien encounters. Among the carefully selected sounds and images representing Earth's greatest achievements, ancient wisdom travels alongside Bach and Beethoven, carrying 3,000-year-old insights about human nature toward distant stars. Consider the profound optimism encoded in this choice. Scientists and scholars selecting humanity's most essential knowledge for preservation across cosmic time included Proverbs alongside mathematics and music. They recognized that understanding how to live wisely might prove as valuable to future civilizations as understanding how to manipulate matter and energy. The Voyager records include greetings in 55 human languages, but they also carry something more: encoded wisdom principles that transcend linguistic barriers. The mathematical relationships embedded in ancient proverbs, the structural patterns that have proven themselves across millennia of human experience, the compressed algorithms for successful decision-making that remain as relevant in the space age as they were in the age of agriculture. Picture those golden disks spinning through the cosmic void, carrying humanity's message to civilizations we may never encounter. In the vast silence between stars, ancient wisdom continues its journey, patient and enduring, ready to speak to minds we cannot imagine about challenges we cannot anticipate. But the real exploration of wisdom's future is taking place much closer to home, in quantum computer laboratories, where the strangest discoveries of modern physics converge with the oldest insights of human consciousness. Dr. Elena Vasquez at the Quantum Computing Research Institute has made a discovery that challenges everything we thought we understood about the ND3 relationship between ancient wisdom and cosmic reality. When we analyze the mathematical structures of ancient proverbs using quantum computational models, we find patterns that mirror fundamental aspects of quantum mechanics itself. Dr. Vasquez explains, as her quantum processors map the relationships between biblical sayings, the parallelism, the superposition of meanings, the entanglement of concepts. It's as if ancient wisdom intuited principles that physics is only now beginning to understand. Her quantum algorithms reveal that wisdom operates according to principles surprisingly similar to those governing subatomic particles. Individual proverbs exist in superposition states, carrying multiple potential meanings simultaneously until observation collapses them into specific applications. Networks of connected sayings display quantum entanglement characteristics, where insights separated by vast conceptual distances influence each other instantaneously. The implications stagger the imagination. If wisdom follows quantum principles, it might possess capabilities that classical logic cannot explain. The mysterious power of ancient insights to remain relevant across dramatically different circumstances might reflect not just cultural persistence, but alignment with fundamental features of reality itself. Molecular biologists studying the mechanisms of cultural transmission have identified patterns that parallel genetic inheritance systems. Dr. Sarah Chen's research team at the Institute for Cultural Evolution has discovered what they call wisdom genes, structural patterns that ensure certain insights survive and proliferate while others fade and disappear. Cultural information follows evolutionary principles similar to biological information. Dr. Chen explains, as her computers trace the transmission of proverbs through historical documents. Successful wisdom sayings possess characteristics that enable them to replicate accurately across and down generations while adapting to new environments. They've evolved optimal formats for survival in human consciousness. The research reveals that ancient proverbs underwent millions of micro-adaptations as they passed through different cultural environments, refining themselves through natural selection processes that favored insights capable of promoting human flourishing across diverse circumstances. The wisdom that survived to reach modern times represents the refined product of humanity's most successful experiments in consciousness development. This evolutionary perspective explains why ancient wisdom often seems more sophisticated than the cultures that produced it. The insights preserved in texts like the Book of Proverbs weren't created by individual genius, but evolved through centuries of collective experimentation, testing, and refinement. They represent humanity's accumulated learning about optimal approaches to the challenge of conscious existence. Quantum archaeologists, working at the intersection of physics and history, are developing technologies that could revolutionize our understanding of ancient wisdom traditions. Dr. Michael Harrison's team at the Temporal Information Recovery Project uses quantum field fluctuations to reconstruct information from molecular traces left in ancient writing surfaces. Every act of writing leaves quantum-level impressions in the material substrate, Dr. Harrison explains. As his instruments scan fragments of papyrus and parchment, we're learning to read these molecular memories, recovering text from documents that appear completely blank to conventional analysis. The implications for wisdom research are extraordinary. Quantum archaeology might enable recovery of Solomon's original 3,000 proverbs, including the 2/3 of his collection that were lost to conventional history. Imagine accessing the complete corpus of ancient wisdom, insights that shaped civilization's development but disappeared before they could be fully preserved. Early experiments have already recovered previously unknown wisdom sayings from parchment fragments found in ancient libraries. Each new discovery reveals additional dimensions of ancient understanding, demonstrating that preserved texts represent only a fraction of the wisdom generated by earlier civilizations. But quantum archaeology's most startling discovery involves the apparent interaction between consciousness and information preservation. Quantum-level analysis suggests that text infused with deep meaning creates more persistent molecular traces than routine writing. Wisdom literature seems to embed itself more deeply in physical reality than other forms of written communication. Contemporary artificial intelligence research has reached a fascinating paradox. The most sophisticated machine learning systems can analyze millions of existing proverbs and generate new sayings that follow all the identified patterns of successful wisdom literature. Yet somehow, the machine-generated proverbs lack the lived authority that characterizes ancient insights. Dr. James Morrison at the Institute for Artificial Wisdom has created AI systems capable of producing proverbs indistinguishable from ancient originals in structural characteristics, yet human subjects consistently rate them as less compelling and memorable than traditional sayings. The difference appears to lie not in logical content, but in what Dr. Morrison calls experiential resonance. Ancient proverbs carry something that artificial intelligence cannot replicate: the accumulated weight of lived experience, Dr. Morrison explains. They encode not just logical relationships, but the existential testing that validates their insights. Machines can analyze patterns, but they cannot suffer, struggle, and discover truth through personal encounter with reality. This limitation reveals something profound about the nature of wisdom itself. True wisdom emerges not from logical analysis alone, but from the intersection of understanding and experience, concept and consequence, insight and application. The authority of ancient wisdom derives from its testing in the laboratory of human existence across centuries of practical application. Yet artificial intelligence research contributes valuable insights to wisdom studies. Machine analysis reveals hidden patterns and connections that human minds might miss, identifying structural principles that can guide contemporary wisdom development. The collaboration between human insight and artificial analysis promises advances in understanding that neither could achieve alone. Space colonization projects face unique challenges that highlight wisdom's continuing relevance. The first permanent settlements beyond Earth are developing their own proverbs about life in artificial environments, yet they consistently treasure Earth's ancient wisdom as connection to their origins. Dr. Amanda Torres, psychological advisor to the Mars Colonial Project, reports that settlers find ancient proverbs surprisingly relevant to the challenges of life in space habitats. Insights about patience, cooperation, resourcefulness, and character development prove just as valuable in domed cities as they were in ancient villages, she explains, via transmission from the Red Planet. The space colonies are becoming laboratories for testing wisdom's universal applicability. Removed from Earth's cultural contexts, settlers discover which insights reflect fundamental principles of human nature and which depend on particular environmental circumstances. The results consistently validate the universality of core wisdom principles while revealing new applications for ancient insights. Martian communities have begun developing their own wisdom sayings about life in low gravity, extreme isolation, and artificial ecosystems. But these new proverbs consistently echo the structural patterns of ancient Earth traditions. Human consciousness seems to discover the same essential principles regardless of environmental circumstances. Time capsule projects preparing for 5,000-year storage face the challenge of selecting humanity's most essential knowledge for preservation across potential civilizational collapse. Every major time capsule project includes the Book of Proverbs in multiple languages, betting that wisdom about human nature will outlast technologies and governmental systems. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault, designed to preserve Earth's agricultural heritage through potential catastrophes, includes a cultural preservation component featuring wisdom literature from every major human tradition. Scientists recognize that preserving genetic diversity without preserving the wisdom to use it effectively would leave future civilizations with tools, but no understanding of how to employ them wisely. Climate change adaptation strategies increasingly incorporate ancient wisdom about resilience, sustainability, and long-term thinking. Indigenous wisdom traditions preserved through oral transmission offer insights about living in harmony with natural systems that prove remarkably relevant to contemporary environmental challenges. International development organizations have discovered that projects incorporating traditional wisdom principles achieve significantly better outcomes than those relying solely on technical solutions. Ancient insights about community cooperation, resource management, and sustainable practices often prove more effective than modern theories that ignore human psychological and social realities. The convergence of ancient wisdom and future challenges reveals something remarkable about the nature of human insight. The same principles that guided successful navigation of ancient civilizations continue to provide frameworks for addressing contemporary problems that the original wisdom developers could never have imagined. Educational systems of the future are being designed around wisdom principles that enhance both information, retention, and practical application. Dr. Sarah Kumar's prototype schools use ancient proverb structures to organize curriculum content, achieving learning outcomes that surpass conventional educational approaches. We're discovering that ancient wisdom contains advanced educational technologies disguised as simple sayings. Dr. Kumar explains as her students demonstrate remarkable retention and application capabilities. The structures developed by ancient teachers encode optimal approaches to human consciousness development that remain unsurpassed by modern methods. Virtual reality systems now enable immersive exploration of ancient wisdom traditions, allowing students to experience the historical contexts that produced great insights while testing their contemporary applications in simulated environments. These technologies make ancient wisdom more accessible while preserving its essential characteristics. Brain-computer interfaces under development might eventually enable direct transmission of wisdom insights, but researchers consistently find that shortcuts bypass the experiential components essential for authentic understanding. Wisdom cannot be downloaded like data. It must be lived, tested, and personally validated through encounter with reality. Looking toward humanity's long-term future, wisdom emerges as perhaps our most essential survival technology. Technical knowledge becomes obsolete as circumstances change, but wisdom about human nature, moral development, and sustainable relationships provides principles that remain relevant across any conceivable future scenario. The golden records spinning through space carry more than nostalgic artifacts from an ancient civilization. They carry humanity's most valuable discoveries about the art of conscious existence, refined through millennia of testing and proven across every human culture that has ever emerged. In the vast cosmic perspective, ancient wisdom represents not primitive superstition, but advanced technology for navigating the complexities of conscious existence. Whether humanity's future unfolds among the stars or remains earthbound, whether it involves biological evolution or digital transformation, the essential challenge remains unchanged: how to live wisely, love genuinely, and create meaning in the face of uncertainty. The answers discovered by ancient seekers continue to illuminate these perennial questions, offering guidance for challenges not yet imagined and civilizations not yet born. Tomorrow's ancient wisdom travels toward us from both past and future, carrying tested insights forward while adapting to circumstances yet unknown. In this eternal conversation between human experience and cosmic mystery, wisdom remains humanity's most precious inheritance and most essential gift to whatever forms of consciousness follow in our footsteps across the endless reaches of space and time. Stand where all streams converge, where every insight discovered across humanity's long journey toward understanding meets in a single moment of recognition. Here, at the confluence of ancient wisdom and cosmic awareness, we glimpse something extraordinary, the eternal patterns that connect the first stirrings of human consciousness to the last thoughts of the final star. Listen carefully, and you can hear it, a resonance that began when the first human mind recognized that actions have consequences, that choices shape character, that wisdom can be discovered and shared. This echo has been growing stronger for millennia, accumulating harmonics as each generation adds its voice to humanity's ongoing conversation with reality itself. In the spiral galaxies wheeling through space, astronomers have discovered the same mathematical ratios that appear in ancient proverb structures. The golden ratio that governs the expansion of nautilus shells also determines the spacing of Hebrew parallelisms. The Fibonacci sequences that pattern flower petals and pine cones appear in the numerical relationships encoded in wisdom literature. These aren't coincidences. They're evidence of something profound, that wisdom follows cosmic blueprints, aligning itself with the fundamental patterns that govern reality at every scale. From subatomic particles to galactic clusters, from human heartbeats to celestial orbits, the same principles of harmony, balance, and optimal relationship appear wherever consciousness encounters the deep structures of existence. Dr. Elena Martinez at the Institute for Cosmic Consciousness has spent decades mapping these correspondences. What we're discovering challenges the boundary between physics and metaphysics, she explains, as her computers reveal pattern overlays spanning scales from quantum to cosmic. Wisdom isn't separate from physical reality. It reflects the same organizational principles that govern the universe itself. The implications stretch the imagination. If consciousness emerged through evolutionary processes governed by cosmic patterns, then wisdom represents not human invention, but human discovery of pre-existing principles embedded in reality's fabric. The insights preserved in ancient texts might be glimpses of cosmic consciousness, reflecting on its own nature through human awareness. Consider a grandmother teaching her grandchild the same proverb her grandmother taught her. A gentle answer turns away wrath. In that moment, something remarkable occurs. Across the span of generations, wisdom completes a circuit that connects past insight with future application, creating continuity that transcends individual mortality. The proverb works identically whether spoken in ancient Babylon or modern boardrooms, whether applied to family disputes or international diplomacy. The principle reflects something unchanging about human nature, the reality that aggressive responses typically escalate conflict, while gentle responses create space for resolution. But notice something deeper. The grandmother isn't just transmitting information, she's participating in a process that transforms both teacher and student. In the act of sharing wisdom, she reconnects with insights that shaped her own development. In receiving wisdom, the grandchild doesn't just gain knowledge, but joins an ongoing conversation that stretches back to humanity's earliest days. This transmission process creates what systems theorists call strange loops, recursive patterns where the act of preservation changes both the preserver and the preserved. Each generation that receives ancient wisdom modifies it slightly through their own understanding while being modified by the insights they encounter. The result is a living tradition that evolves while maintaining its essential characteristics, like a river that changes constantly while preserving its fundamental nature. The wisdom grows stronger, rather than weaker as it passes through human consciousness, accumulating experiential validation while adapting to new circumstances. Modern neuroscience has identified the biological basis for this remarkable stability. Dr. Sarah Kim's research at the Memory and Meaning Laboratory reveals that wisdom insights create distinctive neural pathways that become more deeply embedded through repetition and application. The brain literally rewires itself around wisdom principles, making them increasingly central to decision-making processes. Wisdom doesn't just occupy memory, it becomes part of the brain's architectural foundation, Dr. Kim explains, as brain scans reveal the neural changes that occur through wisdom acquisition. People who internalize wisdom principles show altered patterns of neural connectivity that enhance their capacity for complex judgment and emotional regulation. This neurological embedding explains why wisdom traditions persist across cultural disruptions that eliminate other forms of knowledge. Wisdom becomes part of human psychological infrastructure, surviving even when external supports disappear. It exists not just in books and teachings, but in the modified consciousness of those who have internalized its insights. The process creates exponential effects. People shaped by wisdom naturally make decisions that produce better outcomes, creating environments where wisdom principles are validated through practical success. Their example influences others, spreading wisdom through demonstration rather than just instruction. Children growing up in wisdom-influenced environments absorb principles through osmosis, developing intuitive understanding that seems to emerge naturally, but actually reflects the accumulated insights of countless predecessors. The wisdom appears fresh and spontaneous, while carrying the accumulated testing of centuries. In quantum physics laboratories, researchers studying consciousness and information have made discoveries that illuminate wisdom's mysterious persistence. Dr. Michael Chen's experiments with quantum entanglement reveal that information patterns can influence each other across distances that should make interaction impossible. We're finding evidence that consciousness might not be entirely localized in individual brains, Dr. Chen reports, as his quantum consciousness experiments reveal unexpected correlations. There may be information fields that connect minds across space and time, enabling the transmission of patterns that transcend physical communication channels. This research suggests scientific foundations for phenomena that wisdom traditions have long recognized: the mysterious appearance of similar insights in disconnected cultures, the spontaneous emergence of wisdom principles in individuals who have had no exposure to traditional teachings, the intuitive recognition of truth that characterizes authentic wisdom encounters. If consciousness participates in quantum information fields, then wisdom might propagate through mechanisms that complement but transcend conventional learning processes. Ancient insights could influence contemporary minds through pathways that bypass normal historical transmission, explaining why certain principles seem to arise naturally in human awareness regardless of cultural conditioning. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal the remarkable reach of ancient wisdom networks. Recent excavations in Central Asia have uncovered trade route documents showing that biblical proverbs were being discussed in Chinese merchant communities 2,000 years ago. Tibetan monasteries possess Hebrew wisdom texts that arrived through Silk Road connections medieval scholars never suspected. These discoveries reveal that wisdom has always been humanity's most successful export, crossing cultural boundaries more easily than commodities or technologies. While languages, customs, and political systems remain distinctively local, wisdom principles demonstrate universal appeal that transcends cultural differences. The cross-cultural persistence reflects something fundamental about human nature itself. Regardless of environmental circumstances or social arrangements, humans consistently discover the same essential insights about character development, relationship management, and meaningful existence. The variations are surface adaptations. The underlying principles remain remarkably constant. Contemporary global communications networks have accelerated this ancient process of wisdom diffusion. Social media platforms enable instantaneous sharing of insights that once required decades to travel between cultures. Memes based on ancient proverbs achieve viral distribution, demonstrating that 3,000-year-old insights retain their compelling power in digital environments. But the acceleration reveals something interesting about wisdom's optimal transmission rate. The most enduring insights seem to require time for proper integration, not just intellectual understanding, but experiential validation through practical application. Instant communication can spread wisdom concepts rapidly, but authentic wisdom development still follows the slower rhythms of human experience and reflection. The tension between rapid dissemination and deep integration represents one of the key challenges facing wisdom preservation in the contemporary world. How do we maintain the depth and authority of traditional wisdom while making it accessible to generations shaped by digital communication patterns? Educational psychologists studying this question have discovered that ancient wisdom principles provide solutions to their own preservation challenges. The same structural patterns that enabled survival across millennia of technological change continue to work in digital environments, but they require conscious application rather than automatic operation. Teachers who organize digital content according to ancient wisdom structures using parallelism, numerical patterns, and thematic groupings achieve significantly better learning outcomes than those who rely on conventional instructional design. The brain's response to wisdom patterns remains unchanged despite technological innovation. The approaching convergence of artificial intelligence and human consciousness creates new opportunities for wisdom exploration. Machine learning systems can analyze patterns in wisdom literature that human minds might miss, while human insight provides experiential validation that machines cannot replicate. Dr. Amanda Foster's team at the Institute for Wisdom and Artificial Intelligence has developed collaborative systems where AI analysis enhances human understanding, while human wisdom guides AI development toward beneficial outcomes. The partnership produces insights that neither human nor artificial intelligence could achieve independently. We're discovering that wisdom provides the ethical framework necessary for beneficial AI development, Dr. Foster explains as her hybrid systems demonstrate enhanced decision-making capabilities. Ancient insights about character, consequence, and long-term thinking prove essential for creating artificial intelligence that serves human flourishing rather than undermining it. The research suggests that wisdom might be the key to navigating the challenges posed by the maker. Rapidly advancing technology. The same principles that guided successful human decision-making across millennia of social change provide frameworks for ensuring that technological development enhances rather than compromises human welfare. Climate change, nuclear weapons, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence. Each of these challenges requires exactly the kind of long-term thinking, ethical reasoning, and systemic awareness that characterizes mature wisdom traditions. The solutions exist not in additional technical development, but in applying ancient insights about sustainable living to contemporary circumstances. Indigenous wisdom traditions preserved through oral transmission offer particularly valuable guidance for contemporary environmental challenges. Native American insights about seven-generation thinking, Australian Aboriginal understanding of land stewardship, and African traditional knowledge of community resilience provide frameworks for sustainable living that technological societies are struggling to rediscover. The integration of ancient wisdom with contemporary knowledge creates possibilities for addressing global challenges that neither approach could handle alone. Technical capabilities, guided by wisdom principles, offer hope for solutions that are both effective and sustainable, both innovative and respectful of natural limits. In the vastness of cosmic time, human civilization represents a brief moment and the final seconds of a year-long cosmic calendar. Yet in those seconds, consciousness has awakened to itself, discovered principles for its own development, and created wisdom traditions that might outlast the circumstances that created them. The wisdom encoded in ancient texts like the Book of Proverbs represents humanity's greatest achievement, not just accumulated knowledge, but refined understanding of how consciousness can navigate existence successfully. These insights possess a timeless quality that transcends particular historical circumstances because they reflect universal features of conscious experience. Standing at the threshold between past and future, we find ourselves participants in wisdom's endless echo, receiving insights from those who came before, while shaping the understanding that will guide those who come after. Each moment of recognition, each application of ancient insight to contemporary challenge, each transmission of wisdom from one generation to the next, adds another note to the eternal symphony. The echo grows stronger as it travels, accumulating harmonics that enrich its resonance. What began as simple observations about human nature has become a vast chorus of understanding that spans cultures, centuries, and perhaps cosmos. In learning to live wisely, humanity has joined a conversation that may extend far beyond the boundaries of Earth and time. Rest in knowing that this journey through ancient wisdom has added another link to an unbroken chain of understanding that stretches from humanity's dawn to its ultimate destiny among the stars. The patterns discovered by ancient seekers continue to guide contemporary choices, while contemporary experience adds validation to ancient insights. In the approaching silence, hear wisdom's eternal echo from first human consciousness to last stars fading. These patterns of understanding pulse through existence like a universal heartbeat, carrying the promise that consciousness need not navigate existence alone, but can draw upon the accumulated insights of all who have walked this path. Before, the endless echo continues, and we have the privilege of adding our voice to its eternal song.